Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to another Capitol Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I'm Christopher Baxter, Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight PA, and I'm very glad that you joined us this evening. Regardless of your political affiliation or where you stand on the issues, one thing is crystal clear this election season. There is a lot at stake. The gubernatorial candidates have vastly different visions for the future of Pennsylvania, and the balance of power in the US Senate could hinge on who we elect here in the Keystone State. With so much on the line, it's imperative voters have access to trusted, nonpartisan information on the issues and the voting process to ensure they are informed and empowered come November 8th. And that's what Spotlight PA is here to provide. If you're new to our work or programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism about the state capitol and urgent statewide issues. Spotlight PA is unique in a few ways. We don't try to write every story or barrage you with every piece of news. Instead, we provide contextual, deeply reported journalism that gets to the heart of problems, offers solutions, and drives positive change by empowering Pennsylvanians. We also aren't afraid to stand for something. We are nonpartisan. We have no preference for political party. We don't endorse candidates, and we take no position on policy. But we do believe in certain core values, like the importance of transparency in our government or the ethical conduct of our elected officials. We also believe that the more people who are informed and empowered to participate in our democracy and vote, the stronger our state and country will be. This election season, we're setting aside horse race coverage and the latest political spats to instead put voters first. Every story Spotlight PA writes begins with one simple question. How will this help voters make a smart choice this fall? That's part of what makes Spotlight PA a unique news organization. Our work is driven by a deep sense of public service, and it's powered by you, our readers and our members. None of our work, this event, our many newsletters, our investigative journalism, our public service initiatives, none of it is possible without your support. If you're already a member, I want to say thank you and welcome. Glad to have you here this evening. You are among a pioneering group of people making Spotlight PA possible. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining us this evening. As a very special bonus today, all gifts made during this event will be doubled thanks to a generous matching gift from the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. With your support, you can power some of the most impactful journalism in Pennsylvania and ensure we can continue to provide it at no cost. So I'd like to pause here a moment before we get started and ask anyone who has the means to please make a gift now at spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, that's spotlightpa.org/donate. All gifts go directly back into our journalism and help make public service events like this possible. A few other housekeeping items. We are recording today's event to share with those who couldn't make it. Thank you to all of you who have sent questions in advance. If you have not yet asked a question, you can do so using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the toolbar here in Zoom. Simply click that button, type in your question, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. And with that, I'll turn things over to today's interviewer, Spotlight PA's own Stephen Caruso, to take it from here. Stephen?
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Stephen Caruso. I'm the Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. Joining me on this panel are Acting Secretary of State Leigh Chapman and Katie Meyer, our new government editor and reporter. So, you know, just to start, the Department of State has a lot of roles. They supervise professional licensure requirements for more than 24 professions. They register charities and other philanthropic organizations, but the most important thing they do, I would argue, is, you know, they oversee how the state's 67 counties run elections. So as I said, Leigh Chapman is the department's acting secretary. She's been in office in January 2022, the department's third secretary in the last 2 years. And thank you for joining us, Secretary Chapman. So, you know, to start off, and we got a lot of questions about this, I think, you know, got at the concern people have about this. There have been lawsuits over mail-in voting. Some of them are still active, but as of September 29th, 2022, as we sit here, will Pennsylvanians be able to vote by mail in the upcoming general election? Yes or no?
Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Spotlight PA, and thank you, Stephen, for having me here today. And yes, voters will be able to vote by mail in the 2022 midterm election. Voters actually have until November 1st at 5 p.m. to request a mail-in ballot. And, you know, they have until election day at 8 p.m. to return that mail-in ballot. So It's very much the law of the land here in Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has held mail-in voting to be constitutional. So it is something that is in place for 2022. People can request their mail-in ballot now. They can go to vote.pa.gov and request their mail-in ballot, and counties have already started sending them. You know, when we look at our latest stats, we have over 1 million mail-in ballot requests as of today. We have about 1,400 mail-in ballots that have already been returned. So one thing that we are encouraging voters to do is right when you get that mail-in ballot, fill it out, read the instructions, you know, make sure that you're putting it in both the inner and outer envelopes and get it out as soon as possible. And, you know, you could do that through a drop box, through the mail, or you can return it in person at your county election office.
And then, you know, to follow up on that, as I said, there's been a lot of legal action. There's been, I think, a lot of haggling over the exact terms of mail-in voting. Are the same rules in place for this year as they were last year in 2021 when a voter is going to get a mail-in ballot? Will there be drop boxes? Will they have to be concerned about naked ballots? You know, all those things, those still exist, correct?
Yeah, the rules are the same, but one thing that's important to point out is, you know, we have 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and it's up to the county to determine if they want to have drop boxes or not this election. And those decisions are actually happening right now. You know, local county boards of elections are meeting, they're voting on where the drop boxes are going to be, if they're going to have drop boxes at all. So I think, you know, one thing I should say is, you know, if you want them in your community, you know, go to those board of election meetings and put that on the record, because that's really county by county decision. You know, you mentioned naked ballots. That's the law in Pennsylvania. You know, you have to make sure that when you return your ballot, you put it in that inner secrecy envelope and also the outer envelope. You know, you have to sign the declaration. You probably heard about undated ballots. A court recently ruled that ballots without dates or wrongly dated ballots will count. So counties will count that ballot.
And the other thing I want to point out too is that now, if I'm not mistaken, there was a court ruling today that means that counties have the ability to ask you to cure that ballot. If you send in one that has a fatal flaw, they can attempt to fix that. Isn't that correct?
Yes, we were very pleased with the Commonwealth Court's ruling today. You know, we believe as an administration that voters should be able to cure minor deficiencies when it comes to their mail-in ballots. You know, if they forget to sign a envelope or what have you, you know, that's something that we really support the counties to do. So we're pleased with that decision today.
But like with drop boxes, that will be on a county by county basis, correct?
Yes, county by county basis.
So another question, a lot of people brought up that, you know, the counting of ballots in Pennsylvania, particularly with mail-in ballots, has been slow in recent years. It's led to delays in results. You know, but this year, the state legislature sent to Governor Tom Wolf's desk, and he signed it. It's a bill that gave $45 million in new state funding for elections on the condition that counties continue they have to start counting and not stop. So do you have any sense of how that funding and those requirements will impact the speed of the count in this coming election?
Yes, so yeah, we were very pleased with the legislature appropriating $45 million to counties this year, and this is going to happen on an annual basis. You know, it's important that elections are fully funded at the state level and at the federal level. There were actually 63 out of the 67 counties that requested those funds. There were 4 counties that did not. So those counties that did request those funds are required to start pre-canvassing at 7 a.m. so they can start, you know, removing the ballots from their outer and inner envelopes at 7 a.m. That's a requirement. It was optional before. And they have to continuously count until they're finished, which means they can use a portion of that money to hire more staff to continuously count. So that's something that's new this year. Also at 12:01 a.m., counties are now required to report to the public on their website and also to the Department of State how many mail-in ballots they've received and how many that they've counted.
And just so I have it right, so like the counting won't start until 8 p.m. when polls close, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's the canvassing, and canvassing will continue until counties are complete. And one thing to note, you know, you mentioned, will the counting happen faster this year, right? Because of that mandatory 7 a.m. You know, we just don't know. It's really up to the county. We don't know how many staff they hired with the funds. But one thing that everyone should know is it might take a few days because we don't have pre-canvassing in Pennsylvania like other states do. We support at least 2 weeks of pre-canvassing. So, county election officials can start processing those mail-in ballots before. Because we don't have that, it's still going to take us a few days to have unofficial returns. And remember, military and overseas ballots don't come in until 7 days after the election.
Mhm. One thing I want to also bring up is that, a lot of what we've seen from in the last elections has been DOS, and this has not always been yourself. This will be your first general election coming up, but, issuing guidance, like they issued guidance to counties to tabulate undated mail-in ballots, I believe just earlier this week, if not last week. And that follows obviously on a court ruling on that. But the Department of State has also issued guidance in 2021, for instance, when it was less legally clear to not tabulate those ballots. And litigation on this question of what to do with undated mail-in ballots on a state level is ongoing. Given this legal uncertainty, is it the role of DLS to be issuing a policy like that? Is that making things more confusing for counties?
We issue guidance, and it's important that we issue guidance. We issue guidance for a few reasons. One, when there's a new law. So for Act 88, the law that passed $45 million, we issued guidance so counties knew what they could spend the money on and what the new rules are. We also issue guidance when there's litigation, when there's a new court order. So in the case of undated ballots, we issued guidance because it was important for us, for counties to know that the court has ruled that undated ballots and wrongly dated ballots should count. So, we issued that right when that opinion came out through an email, but what we did earlier this week was just memorialize that in a guidance document. And we also issue guidance when counties come to us with questions. There's a lot of questions that counties have around mail-in ballots. So part of the guidance that we did issue earlier this week instructed counties to count ballots when there's tape on them. A lot of people put tape on their envelopes just to make sure it's secure. And we want counties to know that those votes should be counted.
Another question that we have here from Spotlight is, counties are supposed to get rid of election documents 22 months after each election, but the Department of State requested this year that counties retain documents related to the 2022 election or 2020 election. Apologies. Why was that?
We are in a new place right now where there's so much election-related litigation. There have been over a dozen cases alone in 2022. Since I've been here, we've had a few dozen since 2020. And because that litigation is ongoing, you always have to keep documents and records because of, the litigation. So we advise counties, that's why my Deputy Secretary for Elections sent that email to all counties saying, yes, the 22-month period is over, but retain those records because you're going to need them with ongoing litigation. So it's a best practice. And we, as Department of State, we wanted to make sure that counties knew that.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be getting into some audience questions now, and we got a bunch. So, one of the first off the top is, what is the Department of State doing to stop or undo the spread of election disinformation and distrust in our election system? That's from Dan E.
Sure, good question. That's one of the things that we're facing with right now in 2022 is just the onslaught of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. So one thing we're doing is, we are the trusted source of election administration. So we're encouraging people to come to our website, to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter. And we're also trying to just educate voters and meet voters where they are as far as how to register to vote, how to cast your ballot, and how to have it counted. We want to demystify the election system. I think the more people know, the more empowered they are to speak out against mis and disinformation. And we're also trying to pre-bunk some of the common myths that people might hear. So if you follow us on social, we're doing everything we can to do that. But we have a big media campaign where we're posting ads on Facebook. We have them on the Turnpike. We're emailing voters. We're texting voters. For me, it's really about meeting voters where they are and providing them as much information as possible.
Mhm. Another question we got live from one of the listeners, I believe, but we were talking about mail-in ballots earlier, and are signatures required on all mail-in ballots? And also they mentioned signature matching. Are signatures required on mail-in ballots, and B, are counties undergoing signature matching with those signatures?
Signatures are required. Counties do not signature match. They are not forensic analysts in signature matching. So no, but that's in our mail-in ballot guidance, and all the guidance documents that I'm talking about are on our website as well. So they're not only for counties, but they're for the media and the public and anyone who is interested in elections and seeing how they work.
Another question we got is a valid ID or proof of citizenship required to vote? We got this from multiple readers, and so want to put it to you.
Sure. So the eligibility requirements in Pennsylvania, you have to be 18 years old to register to vote, or you have to be 18 by the time of the next election. You have to be a United States citizen. And so, when you register to vote for the first time, you have to show some type of proof of identification. It doesn't have to be a photo ID or a PIN.ID. There's a variety of different IDs that you can choose from. You could bring your utility bill, what have you. But we don't have proof of citizenship laws here in Pennsylvania like other states do.
And one thing I do want to follow up on that is that, in the online voter registration application, it does ask for social security number or driver's license ID, some sort of number, but it appeared to me it doesn't seem to be a required form. You could submit that without providing some sort of identifying information like that. What happens to those applications?
Sure. So if you don't have that information, then you'll get a notice and you have to submit it later. So for instance, if you request a mail-in ballot and you're supposed to put the last 4 digits of your social security number or your driver's license, if you don't do that, the county will still mail you a ballot. And you can vote that ballot, but you will have to go to the county and show proof of identification within a week after the election. So there's guardrails around that.
Yeah. Another question we got is how are the state's election laws enforced? And by that, I mean, we've got a lot of questions of people who point out that, it is illegal under the letter of Pennsylvania law for someone to drop off multiple ballots to a drop box. So does DOS have a role in enforcing somebody who, forcing the law against someone who does show up and drop off 2 ballots at a drop box?
We are not an enforcer. For us, it's really about providing education around the rules around that, right? So in Pennsylvania, you're only permitted to return your ballot unless, you have a designated agent form. So if someone has a disability, they can designate you. There's a form on our website and also on county websites that you can fill out. So there are people who do return more than 1 ballot, and that's legal. But we don't have an enforcement role. I mean, as far as prosecuting voter fraud or anything like that, that would be the district attorney. People can refer cases to the district attorney, but that's as far as it goes for us.
Mm-hmm. Another question we got, I believe this was reported today by Jonathan Leigh with the Inquirer, but a group called All the Vote PA, they have been pushing counties to kick voters off of voter rolls ahead of the election based off of their own analysis. My understanding is there could be some violations of federal law for doing that, but DOS has issued guidance on these groups coming to counties and, my understanding is also the DOS has given some guidance on what counties should do when they're approached in this fashion. Is that accurate? And what was that guidance?
Sure. So yes, we sent an email to all 67 counties. I believe it was 2 days ago, just informing them of the rules around list maintenance procedures. We're within the 90-day window right now, which is a quiet period. So voters cannot just be kicked off the rolls when you're in that 90-day quiet period. And there's strict federal and state laws that counties have to follow when they are removing voters from the rolls. You have to send out a mailing. 2 federal elections have to pass. You put someone into inactive status before you remove them. So there are some strict rules and regulations and laws that counties have to follow. So that was a reminder. And also to remind them that we're within that 90-day quiet period. I mean, you can remove voters for other circumstances, like if I say, take me off the rolls within that 90-day period, a county can do that. Or if someone dies, a county can do that. But we can't have the systematic list maintenance within that period. So we were just reminding counties what the law was.
Mm-hmm. Another question, this one was, I thought this one was kind of interesting. It's just, a reader, Arlene M, said, I've been told that the barcode that I see on my mail-in ballot is assigned to me when I register to vote. That's unique to me and never changes as long as I say registered to vote at my current address. Does every voter in PA have a unique barcode assigned to them when they register? And if so, why aren't people told about this?
I'm not familiar with that. I know there's barcodes on ballots. Different counties use different mail vendors. So there isn't like one ballot that every single county uses. A lot of counties have barcodes on ballots that are unique to the precinct and also the ward on the ballot. On the envelope, they're barcodes where voters can track their ballot, but I'm not aware of when you register that would connect. So I can follow up with more information, but it's an interesting question and thanks for asking.
Mm-hmm. And another question we got from reader Frida T. What is there official policy about constables with or without firearms near polling places? Are they allowed inside polling places? Can county election boards set policy allowing constables with or without firearms in the polls? And then kind of from us more broadly, what license do counties have to sort of protect against voter intimidation that they might be worried about at the polls in this November?
That's a very good question. And the law around firearms in the polling places, they're permitted, right? As long as someone has them legally, so constable or voter, they're permitted. There are some exceptions based on the location of the polling place. So if it's in a courthouse or a school, you can't have firearms. Also for Philadelphia, there's some exceptions around rules around concealed carry in Philadelphia. So I would definitely check that. But when it comes to voter intimidation, thank you for bringing that up. That's one thing that we are concerned about is, presence of firearms in the polling place can be intimidating or prevent someone from casting a ballot. So we actually have voter intimidation guidance that's on our website. And it goes through information on what could be intimidating conduct. It also has information about how to report voter intimidation. If it happens, of course, call 911, you can call the district attorney, you can call our hotline. So that's available on vote.pa.gov.
Mm-hmm. You've been talking a lot about the guidance that DOS does send out. Is there any guidance on like how Dropbox should be deployed, if they should be monitored, where they should be, how many counties can have? Has DOS issued any guidance on that?
Yes, we do have guidance on the types of Dropbox, recommended security, of course, security cameras, the type of structure the Dropbox should be. So there is guidance on best practices for Dropboxes. But once again, it's up to the county as far as locations, how many, hours, what have you. That's a county by county decision.
Mm-hmm. And this is from a viewer. They point out that with when you go to the polls on election day, you're going to sign the poll book, and there's some comparison of your voter of your signature in the poll book, and they're asking why is that not in place in the same way for a voter verification or signature verification for a mail-in ballot? Given the guidance and the court ruling that we saw in 2020, I believe, on that.
Once again, poll workers are not forensic handwriting experts. I'm sure many of us have aging family members and their signature changes over the years. So I think we have to be very careful when it comes to signature matching. And that's just something we need to think about. Our signature, my signature when I was in high school is not the same as it is now. It's not the same as it will be when I'm older. So I think that's something that we have to be very cautious about.
Yeah. We're running low on time here, so just sort of to wrap up, like, what would be your advice for Pennsylvania voters this November if they want to make sure that their vote counts, and they have what would you tell the prospective voters about what they should do?
Sure. Well, we're 40 days out from the election. It's almost October. I really want people to make a plan to vote. So think about, do you want to vote by mail? If so, you can go to our website, vote.pa.gov. You can request a mail-in ballot right now. And I would say return it as quickly as possible. You know, in recent years, we've had delays with the mail, right? We've had lots of different issues that could arise. So just get it in as soon as possible, whether that's by mail, Dropbox, or in person in your elections office. You can also request a ballot at your elections office and fill it out and return it right then and there. It's called over-the-counter voting, which is something that people should consider taking advantage of. But know the deadlines. The deadline to register to vote is October 24th. The deadline to request a mail-in ballot is November 1st. Just encourage your friends and family to participate in our elections. It's critical that we have every eligible voter in Pennsylvania participate. There's still over 1.7 million voters who are eligible to vote who aren't registered. So, as you mentioned, we have a Senate race, a governor's race, Congress, the state house, half of the state Senate. So this is something that's critical, and it's important to have your voice heard.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Secretary. We appreciate it, and we'll see what happens in the next month. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other more.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I had a wonderful time. So take care.
Thank you. So we have 20 more questions that Katie and I are going to try and get through here. So thank you all for your participation in the questions. Keep them coming, because honestly, I didn't think we would get through as many as we did. Well, hi, Katie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Steve. Yes, so I'm Katie Meyer. I am a government reporter and editor with Spotlight PA. I just joined Spotlight, but I had basically the same beat when I was at WHYY Public Radio in Philadelphia for several years before that. I worked with Stephen in the Capitol, so we've been covering a lot of the same stuff. So we can take a lot of logistical questions about state policy, things like that. And I guess, Steve, do we want to start off with one we have in here from Fred H?
I think we should. And the question is there any interest in producing a bill that will allow the opening of mail ballots prior to Election Day? And I love the passive voice, because I don't know who'd be producing it, because a lot of people have tried. Katie, do you want to go from there?
It'll emerge out of Harrisburg somehow. No, it's like the topic du jour whenever we come up and talk about elections. The big thing that, as many people on this Zoom call know, because you're high information voters, Pennsylvania does not allow counties to begin tabulating ballots before 7 a.m. on Election Day. It's kind of a holdover from old laws when Pennsylvania had much more restrictive mail voting laws. And it is a consensus position among counties, among election experts, that is the thing that would make elections faster in Pennsylvania, that would keep us from this thing that we've had since the mail voting law was updated in 2019, where we wait days sometimes in competitive elections, or weeks even, to get results. And so, yes, there's interest in producing that bill, but what has happened, as Stephen can attest to this as well, is that it's a big lift to produce an election bill. And generally what happens is that even though most people do not oppose this idea of opening mail ballots earlier, or canvassing them, getting them ready to be scanned and tabulated, Republicans who control the state government committees, who control the House and Senate, have generally tried to put other things that are much more controversial into those bills. So they have never passed. So Tom Wolf vetoed one earlier this year, I want to say it was, or late last year, and that's kind of the last attempt that we saw. So I don't know, Steve, are we going to see any more?
I'll say what I told another reporter who asked me this. If a bill like that passes, I will eat their hat.
Their hat.
But no, the one thing I do want to just say, which is like my very my thing that I feel like always has to be hammered home, is that under state laws is pre-canvassing does include tabulating, does include counting. So like there would be counting of ballots before Election Day. The main thing is what it comes down to, like under the current definition of pre-canvassing. The legislature changed that with a bill. And so, that's something that, I think I've heard Republicans worry about, the leaking of results. I've heard some Democrats in Philly complain about it,
Yeah.
that someone linked to a political machine working in the election office will leak results early, and they will use that to their advantage. So, it is not necessarily a partisan concern on people's parts that those results will leak, but it is bipartisan in the sense of county officials from red and blue counties still say, like, look, this doesn't really happen all that much. There are leaks. We really need this to keep up with the weight of mail-in ballots.
Yeah. And also, just to be clear, we have a comment here from Barb saying that we're blaming Republicans. Barb, it's nothing personal about parties. It's just that Republicans right now control the House and Senate, and they control the committees where these bills come out. And usually those bills are authored by Republicans. So that's the only reason we say that that is what the bills have contained, because they were authored by Republicans.
Another question to keep on the topic of, I feel like, the legislature and legislation and the political side of voting is, this was from Deborah J. Is there any talk of getting rid of vote by mail? Katie, want to start?
There's talk for sure. So that's been, a big issue in this year's election, a huge talking point, especially in the governor's race. Doug Mastriano, the Republican running for governor, has made it very clear he wants to get rid of mail voting, or the widely expanded no excuse mail voting that we passed in Pennsylvania in 2019. A lot of other Republicans have jumped on that bandwagon. Some have said they want to restrict it. So yes, it is something that there is an appetite for, specifically among Republicans in Pennsylvania. If the governor stays a Democrat, I don't see it happening. Tom Wolf has said he's very opposed to that. So has Josh Shapiro, the Democrat running for governor. But if Mastriano is to win the governor's race, that would be a real possibility.
I will just co-sign most of that. Like, I guess the only thing I'd add is that there also is the specter of a legal challenge brought by, I want to say 8 or 9 Republican members. It might be more than that. Don't quote me on the number, but there is the specter of a legal challenge brought by Republican lawmakers in the Pennsylvania House without the backing of leadership, to get rid of mail-in balloting. It was defeated on its merits, but then they brought a second challenge that's more of a procedural, technical challenge, but still they're arguing that it should lead to the tossing out of Act 77, the state's mail-in ballot law. So there's a hearing on that, I think, scheduled for the next month. So, I don't know how quick Commonwealth Court feels like acting, but, that is this one little other specter of uncertainty that could hang over mail-in ballots at this point.
And just to be clear, Stephen mentioned that it's a technical, a procedural question that they're asking. It's because when the law was passed, there was this back and forth over whether it needed to be a Constitution amendment or if it could pass as simple legislation. At the time, the lawyers for both chambers and both caucuses kind of came to a consensus agreement that no, it could be simple legislation. I actually talked a lot with Drew Crompton, who was then a Commonwealth Court judge at the time, who was one of the people giving legal opinions on that, and he was fairly convinced that it was okay legally. But again, it was always a question. So that would be the reason why this law would get thrown out if it does get thrown out. And again, we do not know what's going to happen with that, but it's an open legal question.
Let's see. Then we also got a question. Can you explain the questions on this year's ballot from Michael K? Katie?
So there are not any questions on this year's ballot. So that means, Pennsylvania on statewide ballots, we do not have ballot measures usually. What we have are constitutional amendments, which do pass in a statewide referendum. I'm sure you have heard about proposed constitutional amendments. There are a bunch of them floating around, but none of them have gotten far enough through the legislative process to be on the ballot this year. So look out for them. The soonest many of them could be on the ballot is May of next year, May 2023. May of next year. And so, one would change the state constitution to open up a 2-year window for people who were sexually abused as children to sue retroactively post statute of limitations. One has 5 different proposals. That's a little bit more divisive. It's a bunch of different stuff. We've done a story on it. So they will not be on the ballot this year.
One question we got from a listener that I will just sort of jump into. We got regarding mail-in ballots are both a registered Democrat and registered Republican present when envelopes are opened to ensure accurate recording of votes, from Linda F. So I would say the answer is like a yes if there are people to do it. Both parties are welcome to send observers to the counting of ballots, to of all ballots, mail-in ballots, make sure everything's tabulated. They're always welcome to do that. I think it's usually just a question. And in fact, actually, no, I don't even know if they can count without observer. I will admit I'm not as expertise as some of the other reporters on this topic, but that is definitely a thing. Katie, anything you'd add on that?
Nope, I think you covered it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, another question. Can out-of-state college students vote in the PA midterms? How does that work? From Lucy.
So yeah, I mean, it's the same as anybody else who is out of the state during the midterms, but is still a resident of Pennsylvania. So if your college student has, switched their voter registration to another state, no, they can't vote. But if they haven't, they're still registered in Pennsylvania, then yes, they can just send in a no excuse mail ballot or an absentee ballot in that case, and that is no problem, or they can travel back to Pennsylvania to vote. So no problems there. And then Steve, did we want to, we have a question here from Dan. Is the state going to send out printed copies of the proposed amendments to the Constitution? So those, again, aren't going to be on the ballot this year, but yes, those are in all the newspapers ahead of the relevant election. And Steve, question for you. This is from Karen C. Karen writes, given the big lie, how many cases of documented fraud were there in the entire state for the 2020 election?
Yeah, so according to the AP, there were 26 cases that they could track down from contacting, I believe, all 67 counties. And, of that, most of the cases, according to the AP, were basically someone trying to vote a mail-in ballot that somebody for a dead older relative, like a mother, was a common one. I'd also like to point out that, in some of these cases, there were registered Republicans casting it, registered Democrats casting it. We also don't know from the party registration if they, who they're going to vote for, because party registration is just that, Democrats can vote for Republicans, Republicans, Democrats. But, all that to say that, if one wants to then, expand on that, you could, Republicans in the General Assembly have made arguments that, there is unlawful voting, which is the phrase they'd like to use, when somebody drops off one mail-in ballot or drops off multiple mail-in ballots at a drop box instead of one, like they are allowed to, unless they're a very specific case where they have guardianship, as the secretary talked about. So, that could be considered unlawful voting. I don't know if someone wants to consider that fraud, that's kind of their right to. And overall, I think, looking at it, there have been many chances in court for people to try and document examples of this. There have been, even Seth Grove, the chairman of the House State Government Committee, a Republican, when I interviewed him, pointed out that most of the fraud they could find in spring of 2021 was a handful of Republicans trying to vote mail-in ballots at the time that for a dead relative. So, there's this small example of 26 examples you can find in 2020, and going on from there, you can find other historic examples in local elections in Philly, but even then we're talking on the scale of maybe 10, 20, 30, not thousands and thousands of votes that change the outcome of election. And that is me quoting from Seth Grove.
Yeah. One thing, Steve, you mentioned drop boxes, people dropping off multiple ballots to drop boxes. We had a couple questions in there, so I'll just first say counties, put cameras over them. That is like a requirement in Pennsylvania law, where they have to be monitored 24/7 by a security camera. Mm-hmm. And just in general, there is legitimate discussion to be had about if a person doesn't know that they can't drop off multiple ballots, they're not doing it with any ill intention. This is the thing that happens. What is the appropriate penalty for that? And how important is that? Is that considered fraud, like you said, Stephen? And I think that's a legitimate question of just how bad is that? How much of a difference does that make in an election? If both people are actually registered voters. It's also worth saying that other states don't have any issue with a voter dropping off multiple mail ballots or putting two in the mail, that kind of thing. So, there are gray areas here, and I wouldn't like always ascribe ill intent to somebody who drops off multiple ballots.
Yeah, it's the state law clearly bans oh my god, ballot harvesting. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from, and that's something that could be fixed it could be changed, could be amended in a omnibus election bill that, the kind that the General Assembly advanced. The Tom Wolf veto. The General Assembly said they try to advance again, and they have not done. So, there's a lot of very open questions, and I think we're seeing that too in the way that the Secretary of State has felt the need to issue these guidances, some of which end up in court, that there's just a lot of holes in the state's election law that will probably only be solved once every party can come together and, sort of just sit down and hash something out that gets actually signed.
We also have a question from Jamie M, who was wondering about, Jamie said, I asked to receive a mail ballot so I could see ahead of time what the questions were and who was running for what office. Every time I voted previously, I see names on the ballot I've never seen before. So of course I have no way of investigating their platform or past before the actual election night. But I do plan to vote in person. Is this acceptable? Jamie, appreciate you trying to be prepared before you vote. Spotlight PA does have a tool where you can look up, if this is helpful, how your district has changed in this year's redistricting. That's a big deal because you might have a new state representative, you might be in a different state Senate district. And so, I encourage you, we can drop that link, or maybe we already have in the chat. Yeah, so there's ways to look that up. You can also just check online which district you're in before you vote, and you should be able to get sample ballots. Any other tools that we can throw out there, Steve?
I think that, it's honestly that I'm not even trying to say this to sound like that, but I think the tool that Spotlight put together, it seems like it has most of the things I would throw at people at this point.
Yeah, it's a really good tool. I gave it to people before I even worked at Spotlight. So that is a testament to how good it is.
Katie, I did see a question on felons registering to vote or voting in Pennsylvania. This is from the Department of State's website. If you are a pretrial detainee, have been released or will be released by the day of the next election on probation or under house arrest, you can register to vote. So that includes if it's a felony. You cannot register to vote if you are confined in an institution on a conviction of a felony, if you're in a halfway house or alternative correction facility for a felony, or if you were convicted of violating any provision of Pennsylvania's election law within the last 4 years. So the only people who cannot register and vote under state law are people who are currently confined for a felony, or basically if you have violated the state's election law within the last 4 years.
Yeah, so if you're on probation, parole, a lot of other stuff, yes, you can vote. What else do we got, Steve? We've got a bunch of questions coming in here. We talked about getting rid of vote by mail. Yes, people want to do it. Unclear if it's going to happen. Let's see. If both, I'm not sure what that means. Somebody wants to know if they can use Sharpie on their mail ballot.
I do not know. I would check with your local election office.
Yeah, check with your I don't recommend it, because just use a pen. I feel like that protects you from like bleed through, which could be an issue. Yeah, we appreciate that. Any other ones you want to hit, Steve?
I see also in we got a question on Wolf's lawsuit against SB 106, which was the omnibus constitutional amendment that has language on abortion, on regulations, on voter ID, on election audits, and on how to elect the lieutenant governor. There, I think I got all of them. So why was that taken to a lower court? That's basically just because the state Supreme Court declined to take up that case on an emergency basis known as King's Bench, and said, Governor Wolf, you're welcome to make this suit, but you have to go to a lower court first. So, it's the state Supreme Court just said, we're only going to hear this if you work your way up all the way, the long way. We're not going to immediately take over jurisdiction, which is what the state Supreme Court has done on a number of election matters, but they decided not to on that amendment. Anything you'd add, Katie?
No, good summary. I'm looking at a lot of the questions we have about Eric, which is, let's see.
The ERIC is a nonprofit that is used to help states manage their voter rolls.
Yeah.
And it is, so a lot of states are in it. They use the compared data, try to look for, if people register in other states, if people die, death records, to try and clean up voter rolls. And Pennsylvania is part of it. There has been some talk of the reason that the state was holding on to, or it was asking counties to hold on, was because of ERIC. ERIC is referred back to the Department of State. We're going to see what happens there. I think that there are 31 states in ERIC. There are Democrat and Republican states, and Republican officials have defended it in deep red states like Alabama just as much as Democratic have. I think there's a lot that can be said about Pennsylvania's voter rolls. The General Assembly passed a bill to try and make it easier to get people who are dead off of the voter rolls. And the Shore system was sort of the former Auditor General Eugene T. Pasquale, issued a audit on that found that there's some issues with it. That needs to be upgraded, absolutely. But I also think been a lot of talk about ERIC that tries to make that to be something that it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as Stephen said, I think 33 states are in there, and this kind of does. And we talked about this with the Secretary of State as well. But I do think this ties into the concerns that the group. What are they called? Audit the Vote, brought recently, where they had to, hand down some guidance. So again, there are really specific rules federally and statewide about taking people off of voter rolls. And the reason is, you want to double check that. So if, you're doing list maintenance, the voter either has to request to be removed from voter registration rolls, or you have to send a notice to the voter's house, then they have to respond and say, yes, I did in fact move, you can take me off of the rolls, or they don't respond and you don't know. It takes a lot, because you don't want to just take people, you don't want to kick people off of the voter rolls for no reason. And, because the right to vote is considered pretty important in this country. And there are historically a lot of examples of people being kicked off of voter rolls for political reasons. And so that is one of the reasons why we have these protections. Now, as the Secretary said as well, and I think this is, good to emphasize, and this is not a new thing, the 90 days around an election are supposed to be a period where you're not changing your voter rolls very much. You're not doing, widespread kicking people off or adding people or changing much. So again, a little bit more context there.
I see we also got a question about if there is a specific mail-in ballot for disabled people, or absentee ballot. So people with disabilities could basically apply for either. I mean, Pennsylvania has both absentee ballots by its constitution, which have a very limited application. You have to be able to prove you're going to be gone for work. You have to be able to prove religious reasons you won't be at the polls, or one of them is health. If you can prove for health reasons not to be able to make it to the polls, you can apply for absentee ballot. That'll be kind of protected no matter what happens with Act 77, though, like I said, courts have upheld it so far. But if you're a person with a disability trying to decide how to vote, where you won't be able to make it to the polls for whatever reason, you can apply for an absentee ballot, you can apply for a mail-in ballot. Both are there, both are options, and you are qualify under both. So I saw we got that question from Margaret. I wouldn't. It's a good question, and both are there for you.
All right, so I think we're going to kick this back to Chris soon, but just before we wrap up, one more question from Margaret. Did we get to this one, Steve? How does one track a voter registration or a mail ballot?
I am going to, there is a link,
yes,
from the Department of State to check your mail-in ballot status that I hope will get matriculated. I am busy Googling. And then what was the other part, Katie?
I was saying we're going to throw it back to Chris and wrap up, but I do want to thank everybody for all the great questions. We could not get to everything. And also Stephen and I don't know every single thing. So, just because we couldn't get to it doesn't mean there aren't answers out there. We can always follow up with people if you want to check in with us after.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Katie. Thank you to the Secretary of State. We're at the end of our time together this evening, but I want to thank everyone for joining us. It was a really important and lively conversation. Always impressed by the amount of knowledge and expertise both Katie and Stephen have in their heads, and also want to thank the Secretary for spending time with us. Central to the mission of Spotlight PA is ensuring that Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism to be informed, equipped, and empowered in everyday life, and of course, at the polls. So as we always say at the end of our events, this conversation was just the beginning. The future of journalism, indeed, the future writ large in our state, will depend on our shared commitment to the truth and a free press. So we invite you to stay engaged with our team, and we welcome your suggestions for how we can improve our coverage. Everything we do at Spotlight PA, we do as a free public service, but that's only possible thanks to the support of our members. And so this is the time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are able to do so, to take a moment and please go to spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, as a special bonus this evening, all contributions will be doubled thanks to a generous matching gift. If you learned something this evening, if you value this kind of programming, if you want to help us keep it available and free for all, your support will go directly back into that work. So I want to encourage you to please make a gift if you haven't already. And if you're already a member, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank everyone again for joining us, and wish you a great end to your week and weekend, and we hope to see you again soon for another event. Have a great night, everyone.